leaving. Don't play with bad weather.
That sounds like an ultimatum.
An ultimatum.
That's really what it means, dude.
Okay, let's talk about fuel pumps and injection. And we're going to buzz into these questions like a buzzsaw here. Technician A says fuel tanks either constructed of steel or brass plating for corrosion resistance or polyethylene plastic. Is he right?
This one right here, I guess.
Technician B says fuel tank filler tubes contain an anti-siphoning device. Anti-siphoning device. So, who knows what an anti-siphoning device is? Have you seen a picture of that in your book?
It's a little like filter looking thing that goes in your pipe. Keep the hose from going down there. It's like a screen kind of.
Okay, so what about those guys? Is the fuel tank constructed of steel with brass plating?
No.
It's not, is it? They're going to put it in a gas tank with brass. You know, how much it cost? All right, technician, fuel tank filler tubes. They do have that. And what that thing looks like is kind of like what JT was talking about. He's right about that. But it's got a sort of a thing like this, and it have a ball in there with a cage. So the gas can go past it, but if you try to stick a sapling hose in there, there ain't no way.
Every one of those things got is like it's right here. So we got the right one, then we got JT's. I'm right, mine in green, so you have to go different.
That's all right. Well, there's probably different types of them.
There's the hose, and it's kind of like that over there. I've cut a couple in half before. Got the screen thing right here. It's all cross-hatched and stuff.
Yep, anything that they can put in there so that you can get gas in there, but you can't stick a sapling hose in there and get it out.
But if you take a long flathead screwdriver and whack it on the ground.
So what you're doing is you're one of those people that when you see that you're not supposed to do it, you figure out a way to defeat it, right?
There you go.
Okay.
Just in
I knew
case-
a guy like that worked at the Ford place over there, and they were talking about. He said, look at that thing they got locked around a speedometer cable on this U-Haul truck. I said, yeah, so you won't take a speedometer cable loose and drive it without putting miles on it. He said, well, I could put a pair of vice grips on that line and drive it, and it would twist it in two. I mean, he's constantly got to come up with some way to defeat the purpose, you know. All right. Amperage draw of an electric fuel pump is higher than specified. Now, we talked about this a couple of days ago. All of the following are possible causes except a restriction in the fuel line. Now, remember what I told you. When a fuel pump is spinning an empty tank, it's going to pull about 1.5 ounce.
Less amps.
1.5 ounce. And if it's pumping fuel, it's going to usually pull 6 to 8. Usually. It can be, you know, it varies from pump to pump, but it's going to be 6 to 8. All right. If it's got higher than that, let's say it's pulling 12 to 15 amps. Right? That's not enough to blow the fuse, but it's higher amps than it's supposed to pull. Would a restriction in the return line cause that? I'm sorry, in the fuel line, not the return line. The pressure line.
No.
Wait a minute, now it's deadhead. It's pumping, I guess, deadhead pressure.
Yeah,
friction.
you're right. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be what about a clogged fuel filter?
Yeah.
That would cause it too, wouldn't it? What about a defective fuel pump?
Yeah.
Yes. What about corroded pump electrical connections?
No.
That's going to make it pull less amps, isn't it? Okay, so that's going to be D. Technician A says fuel tank accident and rollover protection devices include check valves and inertia switches. Technician B says most fuel lines are made of ABS plastic.
No, it
Right.
is. Or yes and no. ABS plastic melts under gasoline.
Yeah, we don't want no ABS plastic. May as well put a coffee cup down there with a styrofoam, you know. All right, so you do have protection devices that include check valves and inertia switches. What does that mean? If you roll the car over, you don't want the gas gurgling out of the tank all over the place, right? So you got these little snorkel type things with float valves and check valves and balls in them and all that. Furthermore, on your Fords and your Toyotas and some of your Nissans, you got inertia switches, so that if something hits like that. And also, if somebody slams the trunk door, sometimes the inertia switch goes, you know, and they go, or they'll start it and it'll go dead. Listen to this. If you ever are trying to start a car, this is a basic rule of thumb, and there's maybe some caveats here. If you start it and it goes dead, what do you know? Probably a fuel problem.
Probably.
If you know what I'm saying, if you start it and it goes dead, it's probably a fuel problem. Because it's got ignition,
Oh, okay.
or it wouldn't have started anyway. Yeah, if you start it and it goes dead, it'll usually be that. Now, there's other caveats here because some of your anti-theft systems will do that. Whenever if it's got a security light or a theft light that's blinking real fast, you're going to be looking for, you know, the thing not letting it have fuel. I'm talking about the anti-theft system. But that's the way that you need to look at that. If it cranks and goes dead, say, well, I know it's got spark. You see. So anyway, that's just a little quickie that you can learn there. Sometimes, you know, if you get to where you know what you're listening to, if you listen, everybody hears, but not everybody actually listens, you know. But if you get to where you can listen, it's like I talk about an engine repair. When somebody's spinning one over, you can tell by the sound of the way it's spinning over, it's got low compression on one cylinder. Whoa, you know, that. So if you listen to that, you can say low compression, one cylinder, I don't know which one it is, though. You know, instantly you know that. Or if it ain't got hardly no compression on any cylinder, it's probably what? Or like if it's got maybe compression on one cylinder, but on none of the rest of them, you know, where it's spinning real free except one of them's puffing. Yeah, that's going to be probably jump time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, on these low tension rings that are in some of these engines now that have real thin rings that are low tension, if the cylinder walls get washed down on those, it spins like you have got the spark plugs out. And if you know, but that doesn't always mean it's jump time. Don't fall in that trap. Always make sure it has jump time before you assume. See what I'm saying? Right. I mean, so if you hear when it sounds like it's jump time, usually it's a dead giveaway if you look at the timing belt and you spin it over and the camshaft's just sitting there. And the crankshaft spinning, I mean, that's a dead giveaway. But sometimes it'll jump just a couple of 3 teeth, and it'll still run even. Well, sometimes it'll jump several teeth, and the engine will still spin. I mean, both the shafts will spin, but it won't have any compression. So just, like I say, you got to use your noggin on that. Don't just assume it's jump time just because it sounds like it has. Because you don't want to go tear it in there and find out, well, this thing hadn't jump time. All I need to do is pour a little oil in each one of the spark plug holes and fire it up. If you're working on a car from the used car lot where they moved it around from place to place a lot and they cranked it and didn't let it warm up, cranked it and didn't let it warm up, they're constantly running rich all the time, it'll eventually wash the cylinder walls down. All right. Hey.
Hey, how are you? Your phone's off the hook.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, man. I was driving my car and it just cut off on me one day. I was like,
What'd she say? Because my phone was off the hook.
off the hook.
She said, whatever happens, do not let JT leave.
Hilarious.
Because the cops are waiting for him right out here.
Well, you try to
We got to wait till they leave. The cops are going to leave when the storm leaves, and then you can go. Only it's after plus time. I'm talking about end of the day, 3:45, something like that.
Wait, huh? You said
They are going to be gone long enough for you to go to lunch.
You said the cops.
No, I'm kidding. I'm just giving you a hard time. Ain't no cops waiting for you.
They finna
Look, the guilty flee when none pursue it. You start talking about cops and he gets scared. What's up with this? Listen, if somebody told me the cops were waiting for me, you think I'd be bothered by that? I'd say, well, let me go see what they want.
Oh, I got
No, I mean, it wasn't that. It was the whole fact that, like, you scared me because I can't stand for somebody to tell me I have got to stay somewhere. Like, if I want to leave, I'm going to leave.
I understand that. Yeah, nobody's going to tie your leg to a chair.
No offense to none of y'all, but
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you're trying to keep me somewhere, I'll fight every one of y'all. I'll try to get out of here.
claustrophobic. No,
No, I ain't claustrophobic.
It sounds like
It's got some kind of phobia. I don't know what you call it, but
I don't like somebody that's making me have to
it's
stay somewhere.
keepophobia or have to do something with phobia or whatever. Okay, we're digressing here. Let's get back on our test here. Okay, the fuel filter in the saran sock inside the fuel tank normally filters particles larger than which of these? 10 to 30 thousandths of an inch, 70 to 100 microns. What's a micron?
Sound like it's way smaller than an inch.
Huh?
Sound like it's smaller than an inch.
It's like
Like a millimeter or something.
I mean, it's actually got a measurement.
dust.
It's a measurement.
70 to 100
millionth
microns. 70 to 100 microns.
70 to 100 microns is the right answer. Let's see, but how much is 1 micron?
It says
the length of your hair.
A millionth of a meter.
yeah.
It's a what? A
A
billion?
millionth of a meter.
What?
Yeah, you can't even see it.
Yeah.
That's how little it
Particle
is.
of dust.
As a matter of fact,
Smaller than that.
you know, the cabin air filters on these cars usually stop particles larger than, 25 microns. You can see them little holes. 25 microns is a heck of a lot. If it's smaller than 25 microns, it'll go through the hole. I would hear some thunder
Right,
here.
man. I'm out of here, man. I was playing. I'm gonna burn it out.
How long does the electric fuel pump run on a fuel-injected gasoline engine if the engine's turned on but the engine is not started?
How long is the electric?
How long? How long does it run?
2 seconds.
2 seconds is correct. That's it comes on, and that's what you listen for when you're switching the key on one that don't start. You go, wing. You switch it on. Fuel lines are constructed from which of these materials?
Stainless steel tubing
And
or copper and aluminum tubing.
no.
I've seen copper fuel lines.
Both A and B.
Oh man.
There's no copper fuel line there. That's it. Did you crash and burn on that one? So, All right, an electric fuel pump should be able to supply how much fuel per minute? Ooh, that's a good question,
2
isn't
to 4 gallons.
it?
That much?
Per minute?
You burning a lot of gas, man.
I'm saying it should. It could pump that much.
0.6 to 0.8 gallons.
0.6 to 20 gallons. That's it. Did he crash and burn again? He guessing his way through it, didn't even ever crack a book. That's what happens when you do that, you fail.
No, you done shook me up now.
Most fuel filters, I got to mark those questions wrong because you guessed at them and they were wrong.
Okay.
Most fuel filters are designed to remove particles larger than how many microns? Well, look at that. Wow.
Oh, that's another question. We just did that one already.
Most fuel filters are designed, I'm talking the one on the frame, particles larger than how many microns?
20.
Okay, that's going to be a 20 there. Fuel pumps being tested with a digital or storage oscilloscope. What in the world are they talking about doing there? How do you take a fuel pump with a digital storage oscilloscope? Come on, you guys that hadn't cracked the book, tell me.
Take your fuel trims.
No,
No,
not
okay.
with an oscilloscope. You can't check fuel trims with an oscilloscope. Give me a massive break here. You got to have a scan tool for that. That's a value that comes out of the computer.
You said it's
It's testing the pattern of the fuel pump to make sure it's pumping.
I mean, how am I going to hook it up though?
Hook it up to the.
I've got a scope right out there. If I'm going to hook it up, I could bring a scope in here right now and I could hook up a fuel pump and I could check it with my oscilloscope. How am I going to do it?
Hook it up to the positive wire on the fuel pump and the negative wire on the fuel pump.
And then what happens then?
You shouldn't it the whole pattern up?
Yeah, so how would you know you got a bad pattern? Technician A says most fuel pumps have 4 commutator segments. You know what a commutator is?
Yeah, there's something right there.
This little power window motor has got, pull all the wires off of this. That's the permanent magnet that goes with it right there, right there. And this right here is the commutator. See that? That part right there, where the brushes ride, is a commutator. All right, this one here's got a bunch of segments. This power window motor does. It's got like 10 segments on it. But I notice I've taken all the wires off of there, but that laminated steel cord. Okay, that's the commutator. When you hear about a commutator, that's what it is. And so, Technician A says most fuel pumps have 4 commutator segments. Technician B says the speed of the pump motor should be higher than 3,000 RPM. Who is right? Now, who else could give you that kind of information? Technician B is the one that's right. Now, what I need to do is I need to have you guys take apart. I want somebody to make me a really nice cutaway of an electric fuel pump so that I can use it for a training game. How about that? High-speed cutter, cut it and all that.
Don't get me into it.
You scared of that? All right. Ben has been a real trooper on that car that keeps having a crooked steering wheel every time he lines it up. We're going to hand it to him. He hasn't got mad. I haven't seen him throw his rag a single time or anything. He's been doing really well. A fuel filter has been accidentally installed backwards. What is the most likely result? That's question number 10.
The reduced fuel economy.
Yep.
No,
Because it got-
actually,
it got like an arrow.
actually, fuel system pulsation noises may be heard. Now, some of you may have seen on a fuel line, you may have seen something that's kind of on the line, that's kind of mounted on there. Just doesn't seem to make any sense, but you'll see this thing is a little diaphragm. Like that, mounted on a line. And usually it doesn't have a vacuum line going to it or anything.
Is that a sound dampener?
Pulsation damper. Because if you don't have that on there, you're going to hear the fuel injectors every time they click, it's going to go tick, 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 and you hear it through the floorboard. So what they do is they put that in there so you don't hear that noise. But if you put the fuel filter on there backwards, you may hear those noises. A fuel injected, and that's a C, right? That's going to be a C. All right, that's question number 10 is a C. Fuel injected engine has a severe surging problem at only 55 miles an hour, which is 88 kilometers per hour. How many of you knew that? Yeah. Okay. How much of a mile is a kilometer?
1.66 miles. I know, 0.66.
Yeah, it's close to 1.5 miles in a kilometer.
Yeah.
No, it's
Close to
shorter than a mile.
It's
Kilometer
close
is.
to it.
It's probably 0.66 miles.
It's more than a mile a kilometer.
How much is a knot?
A knot?
A nautical mile. How much is a nautical mile? Anybody know?
No, I
I've
haven't.
never heard of that.
No. 1.15. Hey, you always learned something, didn't you? Okay. How much does a paperclip weigh? A regular paperclip?
ounce.
Huh? 1 gram.
1 gram, that's it.
No, wait, ounce. Give me a price. All right. So anyway, how much does a cubic centimeter of water weigh?
Oh, that's going to be...
A gram.
1 gram. There you go. Ever got that? So what's a kilogram? Like 1,000 cc's of water. That's like a liter of water. Oh my goodness. Think about that. A liter of water weighs a kilogram.
my math class. Just sit beside me.
All right. That's
Get out
pretty
there.
good. Hey, technical math. All right. All right, so engine operation is normal at idle and low speeds. Listen to what I'm telling you. A fuel-injected engine has a severe surging problem at 55. Engine operation is normal at idle and low speeds. Technician A says there may be low voltage at the fuel pump. Technician B says the inertia switch may have high resistance. Who is right?
A.
Both of them. Yep. Low voltage at the fuel pump's going to make the fuel pump run slower. Okay, now, there was a time. How many of you? Huh?
A door to the sea
We
brake
gonna
still
just
cracked
chill,
open.
man.
Yeah, it's not hurting anything though. It's down most of the way. But anyway, what I was going to say was, listen up here. There was a long time whenever they first started putting electric fuel pumps and fuel injection in there, they were concerned that the customers would be bothered by this humming noise of the gas tank, of the fuel pump in the gas tank. And so what they would do is they'd put a resistor in series. Matter of fact, when the Jeeps first came out, 4-liter Jeeps, we had to add a resistor. You've seen on this gray Jeep over here that Ben's working on, there's a white ceramic resistor mounted. Well, that's for the fuel pump. That's to slow the fuel pump down. You can run it without that resistor just fine. In a lot of cases, you'll have better pressure, and it may do really good. But the other part of that deal is they would put a resistor wire, which is just kind of taped up in the harness and has Hypalon insulation on it, and it gets a little warm, but they use the length of the wire going through the harness to absorb the heat. And what I used to see when that resistor wire on some of those Ford cars would get tired, and I'd see low fuel pressure, there was the little, the little solenoid on these cars. If you got I'm talking about the solenoid on the fender on these Ford cars. You got a big wire coming from the battery, a big wire that's going down to the starter, like that. This comes from a battery that's going down to the starter. You got a little wire here, you got a little wire here. This is an S wire, right? This other wire will have some other letter next to it, and that other wire puts out 12 volts when you spin the starter over. So when this connection is made between the battery terminal and the one going to the starter, your solenoid triggers that. This comes from the ignition switch when you'll start, through the neutral safety switch or whatever. That's going to energize that sucker, because if you jump this to there with a screwdriver, it's going to go, well, no. You get 12 volts here. They used that when it was starting to bypass that resistor wire going to the relay, and you'd have full 12 volts. It didn't bypass the relay, just it bypassed resistor wire. And so what I started doing was I started taking that wire that was hooked to here, and I would put an eyelet on it, and I would move it here, so that we had straight 12 volts going to the fuel pump all the time, and I'd see the fuel pressure get better, because over time that stuff gets tired. You know what I'm saying?
I think it's hailing.
Yeah, it may be, but it may beat the tar out of my yellow Jeep too, and I don't appreciate that. That's already been fixed one time. But, all right, go out there and stop that hail if you can. All right. All right.
And I had an old school Chevy. It was like a 68 model. I was working at the DC at Walmart in Brunswick. And it was a bad hailstorm came through, and everybody's car out there was damaged except mine.
Yeah, because yours had to do
I
with
walked out there, I was like, man, I bet ain't nothing happened to my car.
thick metal. Yeah, there you go.
Everybody else's car was totaled out.
Yeah, you got it.
Big hail on it.
Okay, so if you got the long and the short of it is, if your fuel pump's running too slow, you're going to have low pressure, and sometimes they put resistors in there. So pay attention to that, and don't be alarmed if you've got a situation where you're checking the voltage at the fuel pump. It's normal on most cars because of the fact that they slow the fuel pump down. But particularly on the older ones, like 80s and early 90s, if you happen to be measuring voltage drop between the positive battery terminal and the fuel pump, you're probably going to see some. That's not so terribly bad, but if you're having an issue with low fuel pressure, you might want to double check all those circuits. All right. And I'll tell you something else, too. If I shoot straight voltage to the fuel pump and it takes away my drivability problem, I'm going to figure out a way to leave it there and do it safely. Ain't hurting a doggone thing for that thing to run full speed. Unless somebody's got a hearing problem that causes them to have inner ear issues with that whining, then you want to be careful about, causing somebody a problem like that. That one is supposed to be both of them. 12. A vehicle that fails an hydrocarbon emission test at idle and at 2,500 RPM.
Number 11?
I thought it was neither.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I thought it was neither.
Hey, I'm with you on that, man. I'm nervous.
Hey,
I'm sorry, what were you saying? Amanda said something I missed.
What
What was that?
I thought it was neither.
I'm just looking at that.
Oh, neither. On the 11,
Yeah.
well, if it's got, idle and low speeds, it's not demanding a lot of fuel, right? If you got low voltage at the fuel pump, you're not going to be putting out as much fuel. And if you got high resistance, so the inertia switch, if the inertia switch has got is wired in series with a fuel pump, it can cause that problem. So yes, that's going to be a both. Number 11 is going to be both. Vehicle fails hydrocarbon emission test at idle at 2,500, and the engine has an acceleration stumble. The oxygen sensor voltage is 0.1 to 0.3 volts on the scan tool, and the injector pulse width is high. No diagnostic trouble codes. When propane is directed into the air intake, oxygen sensor voltage increases, and the injector pulse width decreases. The most likely cause of this problem. Now, see, this is a long, drawn-out question. Let's get the scenario straight in our head. It failed a hydrocarbon emission test. What does that mean? Hydrocarbons are too high, too many parts per million. The engine has an acceleration stumble. Okay, that's two things we know. We know that it's got too many hydrocarbons coming out, and we know that whenever you hit the gas, it falls on its face, right? Oxygen sensor is 0.1 to 0.3. What's that telling us? What's 0.1 to 0.3? What is the oxygen sensor telling us about the air-fuel mixture if it's showing 0.1 to 0.3?
It's getting heat. So.
It's lean. Got it? 0.1 to 0.3. You remember where the oxygen sensor is supposed to read? It's supposed to read above a half a volt for rich, below a half a volt for lean. This one's reading lean.
Because lean is clean, right?
Well, lean is going to be clean and hot, but basically you're wanting to go above and below a half a volt. And this one here is actually staying below a half a volt, which means it's always running lean. The injector pulse width is high. The injector pulse width is high because the oxygen sensor is reading lean and the fuel and the computer's trying to correct that. Okay? No diagnostic trouble codes are present. That's interesting too, isn't it? We've got all these problems and we don't have any diagnostic trouble codes. You get a little propane, you shoot it into the air intake through a vacuum hose, you're actually what? You're providing some burnable mix that you didn't have before. All right. Our oxygen sensor voltage decreases, injector pulse decreases. It says, all right, we got fuel. We can, we got everything we need. We can decrease the pulse width to get it right. So the most likely cause is A, a defective O2 sensor. Is it? B, opening in the O2S signal wire. That ain't right either. It can't be because we're reading it. Low fuel pump pressure.
Could be.
That's probably what it is, especially since we're talking about fuel pumps in this chapter. It's not going to be a defective PCM. Fuel pump pressure, it's going to be C. C is low fuel pump pressure, is what it is. The fuel pump pressure is too low after engine startup. Which of these could be the cause? Restricted fuel return line, plugged fuel filter, defective fuel pump relay, or excessive system voltage? Wow, what a crazy question.
It could be restricted.
I would say we got fuel filter issues. Now the return line, now you know what the return line is. The return line, whenever the fuel pressure regulator opens, you get pressure coming in, it goes under the fuel pressure regulator, and it raises that little diaphragm against the spring, and everything that's more than 40 pounds is returned to the tank. If you restrict the return line, what does that do? If I pinch the return line, I'm going to get high pressure. Got it? You understand that? So what we got here is we got a plug fuel filter. All right, now these questions are for 13. So far we have not heard wind, we've only heard rain, okay? Technician A says most electronic fuel injection systems pulse the injectors on and off. Do they? Do they, JT? Most electronic fuel injectors pulse the systems pulse the injectors on and off.
Yes.
Technician B says the computer usually controls the operation of the electric fuel pump located inside or near the fuel tank.
The computer controls the operation.
They're right about both of those. Both those guys are right. Now, hear this. If, listen to me, this is important information. If you're in a situation where you got a pump on the frame, like in the Bronco, the big Bronco's got a pump on the frame, fuel pump's on the frame, you're also going to have a pump in the tank. The pump in the tank is going to be like a little fuel pump. It's kind of like a windshield washer pump. It's not a positive displacement pump. In other words, if it spins, it's just going to move fuel over there and it's going to feed that big pump. If the pump in the tank quits running, you'll have a situation where sometimes the truck will run and sometimes it won't. And years ago, there was a Ranger that came over there that had been at the Lincoln Mercury place for about a week and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with it because sometimes it'd run, sometimes it wouldn't. And I went out there and stuck my ear up to the gas tank. I unplugged the main pump on the frame, stuck my ear up to the gas tank and said, "Put on the key." I didn't hear a darn thing. I said, "Pump in the tank's not running." We put a pump in the tank, fix that one. So we still had a lot. Everybody feels like, well, I hear the fuel pump, But if it's got two pumps, like some of them back in like 89 and back, it's gonna. All of them went in the tank after about 1990. They did away with the ones on the frame pretty much. So the 14 is both. Technician A says the speed density fuel injection system uses the throttle position sensor to measure the load on the engine. Technician B says the mass airflow injection system uses the mass airflow sensor to measure the amount of air entering the engine. That's number 15. The TP sensor cannot measure the load on the engine. There's no way it can. All it can tell the computer is where your foot's at. Now, when the TP sensor is being operated, it does measure how fast you're moving it, and it measures the fact that it is moving, and what it does is it has extra pulses, just like an accelerator pump would on a carburetor. Technician A says the amount of fuel supplied, actually 15 if you didn't catch that, was supposed to be B. Technician B said, A says the amount of fuel supplied by the fuel injectors is determined by how long they're kept open, and technician B says the injector opening time is called pulse width, and it's measured in milliseconds.
We're both right.
Yeah. There you go. 16, both those guys are right. Technician A says to avoid operating the vehicle with the fuel level low. Is there anybody in here that drives around with your gas tank on empty all the time?
Almost gave out today coming to school.
Not good, not good. It gets harder when gas gets up to $1.50 a gallon.
I was trying to, I was trying to make it on time. Instead of stopping at the store, getting it for 5 minutes.
Okay. Everybody knows about that. Now, if you run it low, what happens sometimes? You remember what happened to our GMC? I let the sucker sit there and idle when it ran out of gas and burned up the daggum fuel pump.
Yeah.
Technician B says the fuel filter or return type injection system should be serviced regularly. That's actually number 17. Yeah, I would say they're both right, but the stupid answer key doesn't say that. The stupid answer key says B is the only one right. Why would you not want to avoid the opera? I'm going to fix that. That's it. Got to edit the answer key. Man. That's supposed to be C. All right, 17. Yeah, let's see if we can get done with this, because I want these. I'm always trying to make these. I'm kind of trying to cut these down. We're in here less than an hour, but sometimes I tell stories. Which of these fuel injection system uses the MAP sensor as the primary sensor to determine the base pulse width?
Demand delivered.
Come on.
Speed density.
Why don't we say, what?
Speed density.
Speed density. There you go. That's going to be a C. Speed density. The speed of the engine. The speed of the engine is the first priority, and the density of the air in the manifold is the second priority. That's why they call it. They also have density speed systems. And then they got mass airflow system. They got main airflow systems. And Volkswagen had a K-Jetronic fuel injection system that was really weird. And that was the same one kind that the DeLorean had on it. All right. Why is the vacuum line attached to the fuel pressure regulator on many port fuel injected engines?
A.
And he said, A, that was to create a constant pressure drop across the injector. Now, what in the Sam Hill does that mean? If I've got 30 pounds of pressure on the fuel system with the engine idling, and I've got 18 to 20 inches of vacuum in the manifold under the tip of the injector, the pressure differential, you see you got 2 pounds of pressure per 1 inch of vacuum. I'm sorry, 2 inches of vacuum for 1 pound of pressure. So if I take away all my vacuum, I'm gaining 10 pounds on my regulator, right? Everybody got that? Ben horsing around with his phone over there again. Never fails. All right. All right, now we got, so what you got there, you want it to be constant so that, what's going on inside the manifold, JT? You got vacuum in there, you're sucking fuel out of the injectors, right? Huh? I know.
That's amazing. You know what now?
That one's been leaking over there.
What's the question?
But, sucking the air out of the manifold, right?
Yeah.
I mean, fuel out of the injector,
Yeah.
because you got low vacuum.
You got lower vacuum, you got...
You got high vacuum, you got low pressure. And so you're going to make sure those pressures balance. That's why you have that vacuum line hooked up. I was basically beating a dead horse on that one. I'm going to make sure everybody gets it. It's real easy to sit there and tune that stuff out and not know the answer later on whenever I do the verbal test at the end of the semester. So watch out for that. Okay, which of these sensors has the greatest influence on injector pulse width besides the mass airflow sensor? Queenie, that's going to be a C. C is a good answer. On a returnless General Motors fuel injection system, how often should the fuel filter be replaced? Now, that's a good question if you hadn't looked that up. What do you think?
I think 3 years, 36,000 miles.
You're gonna love this answer. Never, unless you replace the fuel pump.
Wow.
Yeah, I know that.
Well, a lot of the Dodges and stuff have got a fuel filter down there in the tank that's supposed to be replaced at 120,000, but it looks like an air filter almost.
Something about turnless.
Returnless means that it doesn't have but one line going to the fuel system. You notice on the Ranger and on some of these things you've been working on, you'll have a big line coming to the fuel rail and a little one leaving it. That's the return system. The returnless systems, the pressure is regulated in the tank. The regulator will be back there in the tank, and it's regulated at 40 pounds. And there's only one line. Our neon is like that. If you look at the neon is real simple. It's got one little pipe, it's got the injectors hooked into it, and it's got one fuel line going into it. The fuel pressure regulator is built on is that big round thing on top of the tank back there.
Oh, okay.
So some of them actually regulate the pressure back there in the tank, which is the smartest way to do it. Because when you're running up to the engine, what happens? Think about this. You're running up to the engine, this fuel picks up a lot of engine heat. And it goes through a mild chemical change, and then it goes through that regulator and goes back into the tank. And over time, the fuel tends to break down. Yeah, this is not really that great. So what they're doing, you notice how on my little trainer out here, I've actually got it's got a regulated fuel system like that. I just put 40 pounds of pressure right out of the tank into the fuel rail, and I don't have to deal with that. That's what returnless means. No return line going back to the tank. All of it's inside the tank going on back here. Here's another thing. Mustangs and stuff, a lot of them, and some of the newer Ford cars, have got a module back there in the gas tank that controls the speed of the fuel pump to regulate fuel pressure. So it'll slow the fuel pump down or speed it up based on what, and it's got that engine right there came off of a car, was supposed to go in a car that was set up that way. That's why it's got a fuel rail pressure sensor on it. All right. Which of these, let's see, let me back up. Technician A says wiring connectors are the same for all port fuel injected engines and can be switched around without problems. That is obviously false. Technician B says the sequential fuel injectors use a different wire color on the pulse side of the injectors. That's got to be true. They know two ways about that one. You got a different color wire down there, right? All electronic throttle control systems include the following components except, does all of them have a throttle valve actuator?
Yes.
Does all of them have a accelerator pedal?
Yes.
Does all of them have a throttle position sensor?
Yes. Not all of them have the control switch.
Yeah. Yeah, an auto control switch is going to be the one that all of them don't. I mean, all of them don't have that. Now on your Power Stroke diesels, there's a accelerator pedal sensor and there's an idle track. I mean, there's a idle validation switch. And if those two don't agree, the engine won't do anything except idle. Which of these components streamlines intake air into the plenum during high range RPM? Intake manifold tuning valve, throttle body injector, intake air temperature sensor, or idle air control valve?
Idle air control valve.
Now wait a minute, think about what you're looking at here.
This is idle. It's high RPM.
Which of these components streamlines intake air into the plenum during mid to high range RPM?
Intake manifold tuning valve.
This is what we're talking about here. Oh, intake manifold tuning. And we talked about this before. I've showed you this before. You see it? See how this works? Okay. If I move, I can figure out right. You go that. See that? When I move that, see how it changes those flappers? That's what that's talking about. If you got them closed, then the air is going to go faster past those, like you get your finger over a water hose. And they like that, for the air to go through there really fast. And then as you're moving on, whoop, like that. But there's other ways of intake manifold tuning too. I gave y'all guys a whole handout on that. And they do different things different ways. Okay. So, Technician A says electronic throttle control uses a stepper motor. And can somebody, I've talked about this before, could somebody tell me about a stepper motor? What's a stepper motor?
Teach owner.
Huh?
Teach owner.
No. If somebody was going to ask you what a stepper motor was, and they didn't have a foggiest idea.
A stepper motor?
Yeah. General Motors uses them, Chrysler uses them, Jeep uses them. They're used on a lot of different vehicles. Ford doesn't use them on.
I remember you talking about them, but I don't remember what they are.
Can you explain how they work?
No.
No? Why not? Imagine this. Anybody can tell me about a stepper motor? A stepper motor.
Stepper motor's got different, Speeds.
No different speeds. It has different steps. Okay, I'm going to tell you about this because I want everybody to understand it. See, if I just let this, one of the things I don't want to do is I don't want to get in the mindset, and I have a lot of students do that. I want to get in the mindset where I'm just trying to get through the day. You know what I mean? Because an instructor can do that too. If an instructor gets to the point where they really don't care if the students learn anything or not, they just want to get through one more day. You know what I mean? And that is when you really stop doing well. Was that your?
That was your computer.
No way. Oh yeah, it was. Adobe Updater. I'm sure it was. That's the Facebook pop.
Yep.
Yeah. That's what my phone does when I get a text. I didn't want to see him droid all the time. All right, now then, watch this. I'm going to make a screw like this. And this is not a good drawing of a screw, but I'm going to make a screw right here. And I'm going to put a nut on that screw, right? Except it's not going to look like a nut. It's going to look like that. And it's going to have threads that match the inside of that. And then I'm going to make this thing so that it's magnetic. Maybe it's got a magnet mounted here and a magnet mounted here, a north and a south or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Just for that reason. And then I'm going to fix it so that I've got 4 terminals going. I got power coming in, and then my PCM is going to ground these like up, and as it grounds them, it turns this. And as it turns that, this goes out and in. So if you watch a stepper motor, like on that, one of these Chevrolets or anybody, you can put that little stepper motor out of air control in your hand, and when you crank it up, it will go because it's turning this nut. It's driving these things with ground like that. And if it drives them back the other way, it can screw that thing back in. See, so it's moving it. Out here on the outside of this, you've got a little cone-shaped thing. It goes into your, out of air bypass port. But that's what a stepper motor does. That's why if you see a stepper motor, it's going to have 4 wires going to it typically. Some of them may have one of them grounded and it may send power to the other 3, and some of them, and you can actually hook up a 3-tray scope and watch those things work. It's really pretty cool. That's the long and the short of a stepper motor. Now, there are other kinds of motors that do a similar job, but they tend to take up more room. I've got one here somewhere. This one. See this one right here? Now, some people might call this a stepper motor. That's not a stepper motor. And the reason it's not a stepper motor is because the computer, unless it's looking at the throttle position sensor, this is resting against the throttle plate. See, it's got a little tracking switch in there. You can feel that thing, do this. And it can tell when you let off the gas, and it knows when it needs to start fooling with the throttle. When you give it the gas, it runs it out. I could actually connect power and ground to the black and the red and reverse them, and you can see this thing run out and run back in. It's for control throttle speed. The stepper motor is actually the computer, if you look at the scan tool, can tell you how many steps it's got. In other words, if it's got 140 steps, it's actually running the motor, pulling the motor back to make the engine idle up. If it's got not very many steps, it's closing up. So if I'm seeing a different number of steps and I ought to see it, basically means that it's trying to correct for a condition of some kind, if that makes any sense. Like if it's idling too fast and it runs the steps down, it's trying to use the idle air control to do something it's not able to do. If the steps are all the way at 0 and the engine's still idling 1200 RPM, you got an air leak somewhere or something. See what I'm saying? Now, what if your engine is idling way slow? Like if your engine is idling like 5 or 550 and it's wanting to idle about 700 or 800, and you look and your steps are up to 180 steps on your scan tool, then you know good and doggone well that your idle air control is probably not working. So basically there's little procedures in your book for checking those stepper motors to see if they're to see if they're working right. You'll see it if you get a little test light, a little high impedance test light, and even GM book tells you to do this. You can go to your ground side of your battery and check these 3 wires. Like if you just even unplug it, you can check these 3 wires and you'll see it pulsing, trying to drive that thing. So that way the wires are good coming from the computer and you can condemn the valve itself. Anybody got any questions about any of that?
So 25 is A.
Yeah, 25 is A.